Deep in the wild Sierra Mountains, 7 women had come and each one left in tears. Not a single one could last even a week with that man, a silent, rugged hunter so withdrawn that folks called him the ghost of the mountain. Then, one day, the 8th woman arrived overweight, plain, so ordinary that no one even noticed her. She wasn't beautiful. She wasn't strong. All she carried was an old suitcase and a pair of eyes that knew how to listen. But what made her, unlike all the others, stay? If it were you, would you have the courage to stay beside a man who had locked his heart away long ago between loneliness and love? Which would you choose? This isn't just a story about romance. It's a journey of healing for 2 broken souls. Join me as we dive into No Mail Order Bride. Lasted 1 week with the mountain man until the obese one refused to leave and discover that sometimes the strongest thing in this world is gentleness itself. If you love stories about love and forgiveness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts and come along with me on this emotional journey. The wind howled through the tall pine trees, carrying the icy breath of the snow-covered Sierra Mountains. On the porch of a weathered log cabin, a broad-shouldered man stood in silence. His buffalo hide coat flapped against the biting wind. Jonas McCord's gray eyes followed the wagon as it rattled down the winding, snow-packed slope, its heavy wheels carving deep tracks into the thin white crust. That was his 7th mail-order bride, and like the 6 before her, she hadn't lasted a week. When the wagon finally vanished behind the pines, Jonas tugged the brim of his wide hat lower, shielding his face from the lash of the wind. The cabin door thudded shut behind him, a heavy, hollow sound that echoed through the empty house. Only the crackling of firewood and the quiet sigh of a man long accustomed to solitude remained. He set his leather gloves on the table and glanced around the room, 4 timbered walls, a small dining table, a gun rack, and a few traps drying beside the stove. Nothing had changed, except now there was another woman's blanket left behind, and one more crack in the silence. Jonas had lived in these mountains for 12 years. He'd once been a soldier in the Civil War, then retreated into the wilderness to trap and hunt. Men of the West were known to be free, rough, and few with their words, and Jonas was the very image of that truth. But, deep down, he was tired of having only the wind to answer him. As the darkness spread across the peaks, Jonas sat down at the table and unfolded a letter the wagon driver had delivered that morning. The paper was yellowed, the ink smeared, but the handwriting from the marriage broker in Silver Creek was still clear. Dear Mr. Jonas McCord, I believe I have found a match that fits your requirements. Her name is Elena Vargas, 34 years old, originally from Missouri, occupation seamstress. She is described as a woman of full figure, not attractive by common standards, but hard-working, practical, and mature. I trust she has the steadiness required for mountain life. She will be aboard next week's supply wagon and should arrive in Sierra Hollow before the snow closes the road. Jonas read the letter and sat still for a long time. Full-figured, practical, he muttered, half amused, half doubtful. The women before every one of them had been young, dreamy, imagining the mountains as some grand adventure. They came in lace dresses and painted faces and left in tears. This one, he thought, would be no different. He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the wind rose again, whipping the snow into swirling white rings. On the shelf, A faded photograph of his younger brother toppled over. Jonas picked it up, brushed away the dust, and set it back. He'd once sworn never to let anyone walk into his life only to walk out again. But no matter how hard a man tries to be stone, there's always a small corner left open for hope, even the faintest kind. He looked out the window. Far in the distance, dark clouds gathered in the west. Nature's warning was simple: this winter would be harsher than the last. Jonas added more logs to the fire, sorted through his stack of wood, and checked his supply of venison and barley. He lived by habit, measuring each bag of flour, counting the days it would last. Snow could reach 3 feet deep. Temperatures could drop below 10 degrees Fahrenheit. If the new bride couldn't take it, he'd survive the winter alone, just like the 10 before. But this time, he placed 2 cups on the table and left a space beside the bed, not out of romance, but out of mountain courtesy. That night, as the wind roared louder, Jonas sat by the fire, an old book in hand. He read a few lines, then set it down. His eyes drifted toward the door, as if listening for footsteps in the storm. Maybe, somewhere out there on that frozen road, the woman was on her way, bringing with her a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know what her name might change, but the thought alone made the cabin feel a little less cold. The wind moaned through the cracks of the door, like the breath of an old mountain spirit. Jonas closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "If she can last 1 week, I'll build her a room of her own." Far off, beyond the snow-drenched dark, the faint sound of hooves echoed distant but clear. A wagon was climbing the ridge, and, for the first time in many months, Jonas stood up and lit the oil lamp on the porch. The next morning, mist draped the slopes surrounding Sierra Hollow. The tall pines stood frozen in place.
We have to go now,
their branches heavy with snow so thick it looked like white coats draped over their shoulders. Jonas rose early, brewed a mug of strong black coffee, and drank in silence. The kettle whispered as it boiled, steam curling upward like silver threads in the icy air. When he stepped outside to check the stables, the sound of hooves echoed faintly from the distance, steady, deliberate. A pale brown speck emerged against the white wagon climbing through the snow from Silver Creek. Jonas paused, narrowing his eyes toward the winding trail. The wheels struggled, slipping now and then. The driver snapped his whip to keep the horses moving, while the passenger inside sat still. He thought to himself, so she really came when the wagon stopped at his porch. The door creaked open, and a large woman stepped down. The snow crunched sharply under her leather boots. Her dark brown wool dress was neatly tucked, and a thick knitted scarf wrapped her neck. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold, her black hair pinned tightly at the nape of her neck. She didn't stumble. She didn't shiver. She simply stood upright, looking straight at him. The driver spoke quickly. "Road's closing up soon. Gotta head back before the storm hits. This here's Miss Vargas, just like the letter said." Jonas nodded, turning to the woman. She gave a slight bow, her voice husky but clear. "My name's Elena Vargas. Thank you for meeting me." He answered briefly, "The cabin's close. Come inside before you freeze." Elena climbed the wooden steps, her footsteps firm. She didn't gawk or hesitate. Her deep, calm eyes moved across the small cabin like she was quietly taking measure of it. When he helped her hang her coat, Jonas noticed the roughness of her hands, calloused, strong, not soft like the women before. The air carried the mingled scents of wool, snow, and smoke the scent of someone who had worked for a living. She set her leather bag down and said evenly, "I've got some thread, needles, and a few rolls of cloth. If you've got mending to do, I can start right away." Jonas almost laughed. The others had arrived asking about bedrooms, markets, or food, but this one, she was ready to work before warming her hands. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit down. Rest a bit. How far did you travel? Over 40 miles. From Silver Creek up here. I figured I'd make it before the snow got too deep. Not many folks can handle that ride this time of year." She gave a faint smile. "I'm not many folks." The words caught him off guard. There was a flicker of humor in her eyes, but mostly weariness disguised behind quiet strength. He poured her a cup of coffee. She accepted it, inhaled the rising warmth, and murmured, "Thank you." I needed this more than a greeting. The air between them felt strange, not distant. Not close either. It was the quiet understanding of two people who knew what loss felt like and had no use for small talk. Jonas led her outside, pointing out the lay of the place, the small stable, the woodshed, the well just a few steps away. She took it all in with a single calm glance, then asked, "Can I have the room on the right? If you can stand the cold, it's yours." She nodded, unpacked her bag, and laid out her few belongings, a pair of scissors, several spools of thread, and a thin, well-worn Bible, everything neat, nothing extra. By noon, snowflakes drifted lightly through the air. Elena rolled up her sleeves and asked, "Do you have cornmeal?" Jonas said, "Yeah, but I'm no good at cooking it. Then let me do it." She mixed the cornmeal with water, added a pinch of salt, and cooked it on a hot cast-iron pan. The smell of warm cornbread filled the cabin, simple and comforting. Jonas watched her move. Every motion was sure and practiced. Neither spoke much, but for once, the silence didn't feel heavy. While they ate, he finally asked, "Did you come here because you wanted mountain life, or because you needed a change?" Elena looked at him steadily, her voice calm but firm. "I came because I got tired of running from the old place, from memories, from myself. Out here, maybe I can stop." Jonas set his piece of bread down and studied her. No one had ever spoken to him like that before, honest, unflinching, without pretense. Just truth, plain and cold as mountain air, she added softly, eyes drifting toward the window. "They say a woman built like me doesn't belong in the mountains. Maybe they're right, but I'd rather freeze to death than live somewhere I don't belong." Jonas replied quietly, "As long as you know how to stay warm, the mountain won't mind." She smiled faintly. "I have one condition." "What's that?" "If I last a week, you don't say goodbye." "I hate that word." Jonas thought for a moment, then nodded. "Fair, but if you leave early, I won't see you off." They looked at each other, not smiling, but both knowing it was an honest deal. The kind of fairness only two wounded people could understand. Trust built not on words, but on endurance. That afternoon, the wind picked up through the valley. Jonas split logs out back while Elena gathered clothes and lit the oil lamp. The sun sank behind the ridge, painting the sky pale orange. Snow drifted softly across the porch, fine as powder, inside. Elena sat at the table, mending a tear in his coat. Each stitch was steady, patient. Jonas stepped in, watched her for a moment, and asked, "You planning to fix all my busted gear?" Without looking up, she said, "If I'm staying, I'd better keep my hands busy," he replied quietly. "Out here, silence lasts a long time, but if you can stand it, I won't stop you." She lifted her gaze to him through the firelight. "I'm not afraid of silence. I'm afraid of talking to someone who doesn't listen." The words hit him like a gust through the trees. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines like an echo of old ghosts. Jonas knew maybe this time the woman before him wouldn't run from the cold. Night fell, and Elena slept in the room to the right. Through the thin wooden wall, Jonas could hear her steady breathing mixing with the soft crackle of the fire. For the first time in years, he felt an unfamiliar calm, like the cabin itself had found another heartbeat besides his own. Before turning in, he jotted a line in his worn notebook. "She arrived today. The cabin doesn't feel empty anymore. Maybe this time, the mountain will listen." 3 days had passed since Elena Vargas set foot atop Sierra Hollow. The snow had thickened, blanketing the path to the well so completely that Jonas had to rise before dawn to clear it. He worked in silence, the shovel striking ice with a steady clang, clang, his breath turning to mist that vanished into the pale morning air. But each time he stepped back inside the cabin, something felt different. The cold no longer stood alone. Elena had arranged the place with a strange, homely order. Tablecloths woven from scraps of fabric, jars of salt, sugar, and cornmeal lined up neatly in a row. She had even scrubbed the table with ash and sand until it gleamed. The mingling scent of smoke and cornbread filled the room, warm and comforting for the first time. Jonas thought the cabin smelled like someone actually lived there. On the 4th morning, he returned from checking traps along the northern slope. His boots were caked with snow. Elena stood by the doorway, broom in hand, speaking softly but firmly. "Take your boots off before you come in. Otherwise, I'll have to clean the floor again." Jonas froze, startled no one had ever said that to him. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, bent down, and placed his boots neatly by the door. "Call me Jonas. No need for Mister. Then you call me Elena. Fair's fair." From that day on, the little cabin had a new rhythm, a quiet order he'd never known he needed. In the evenings, Elena cooked stew by the fire while Jonas mended a broken steel trap. The flames painted their faces in soft amber light, warm against the white world outside. She worked silently, yet the silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind of stillness that felt easy, like the calm between two people who had known each other for years. Jonas realized he'd stopped counting the days. Usually, he'd mark his journal day 1, she's still here. Day 3, she wants to go back down the mountain. But this time, he forgot. Elena moved through her days without complaint, working, eating, saying little, and showing no sign of leaving. She seemed to understand how to live slow, how to live real, something none of the others ever had. One night, after supper, Jonas pulled an old harmonica from a drawer. He sat by the door and played a slow, uneven tune in low notes. Elena paused in the kitchen, her hands still in the wash basin. "What song is that? I don't know. Heard a soldier play it once, back in the war. It sounds sad. War doesn't leave you much else." She dried her hands on her apron and came closer. "But you still play it." "Yeah, it's the only thing I remember clearly." She didn't answer, just sat across from him. The firelight traced a halo along her dark hair, soft against her round, gentle face. Jonas stopped playing and looked toward the snow. You ever hear folks talk about the silence of the mountain? No. At night, it's so quiet you can hear your own blood moving. Elena nodded slightly. I'm not afraid of silence. I'm afraid of noise that means nothing.
They won't
In the
survive out
days
there
that
much
followed,
longer.
they worked like partners bound by
We
an
have to go now,
unspoken pact.
before it's too late.
Elena handled the cooking, the mending, and the supplies. Jonas hunted, chopped wood, and taught her how to read the wind. One morning, as he was setting traps on the western ridge, she followed with a basket of food. The trail was steep and slick with ice, but she never complained. Each step was slow but firm. When they reached the ridge, she set the basket down, exhaled, and said, "People call me weak because I'm fat. Guess they've never seen me haul buckets up 2 flights at the textile mill." Jonas looked at her, smiling faintly. Up here, the mountain doesn't care what you look like. It only cares if you can stand your ground. Then the mountain's like me. He laughed a real laugh, sharp and honest, cutting through the cold air. That evening, the sky turned lavender. Together, they dragged a deer carcass back to the cabin. Elena didn't flinch, didn't whine, just bent her shoulders and worked as they cut and hung the meat to smoke. Blood stained her dress, but she didn't seem to notice. "This smell'll stick for a week," Jonas said. "Better than the smell of sweat in a factory," she replied. "Don't you miss home? No home to miss. Home's wherever someone needs me." Jonas fell silent. He thought of himself a man who stayed not because he belonged, but because there was nowhere else left to go. That night, snow fell heavy. Elena sat sewing a coat while Jonas reloaded bullets. The small cabin filled with the hiss of fire and the rhythm of shared breathing. He watched her work the steady focus in her eyes, the flicker of flame dancing within them. He didn't know what to call the feeling stirring in his chest. Not love, not pity, just peace, something rare in his life. When she stood to clear the table, he said softly, "Wind'll pick up tomorrow. Best stay inside." "I wasn't planning to go anywhere. The others always wanted to head back to town when a storm came. I'm not like them." "You sure I don't make promises?" "Jonas, I just stay. For me, staying is the promise." He nodded. No more words were needed. The next morning, the sky was a sheet of gray. Wind screamed through the mountain passes, rolling waves of snow like white smoke. Jonas split logs outside while Elena simmered venison stew over the fire. The smell of meat and black pepper filled the cabin, drowning out the scent of pine. When he came in, scarf pulled tight around his neck, he smiled at the sight of her, tasting with a wooden spoon he'd carved himself. She offered him a spoonful. "How is it, a bit salty?" "I like it salty. Salt reminds you you're still alive." He chuckled. "Out here, anyone who survives the winter deserves to be remembered." She said nothing, just stared out at the swirling snow. After a long pause, she asked, "How long have you lived up here? 12 years, and never wanted to leave?" "I did. But every time I thought about going down, I couldn't find a reason to. Maybe now you've got one." Jonas looked up. The firelight reflected in her eyes something steady, unnamed. Not a promise, not a challenge, just presence, strong and unshakable, like the mountain itself. That night, as Jonas blew out the lamp, the snow was still falling hard. He listened to the wind battering the walls, the wood creaking under its weight. From the next room, Elena's voice came softly through the thin wall. "Jonas." "Yeah, tomorrow I'll patch the roof. There's a leak near the corner. You don't have to work outside. I hate sitting idle. Suit yourself." A quiet moment passed. Then her voice again, gentle as the wind. "This mountain, it's not as scary as people say," Jonas murmured back, almost to himself. "That's because you haven't seen its first storm." He lay still, listening to the snow tapping on the roof, and a thought drifted through his mind. Maybe this time, when the storm comes, he won't have to face it alone. Snow fell for 3 straight days, burying the road to town. Wind screamed around the cabin roof like a beast trapped inside the mountain itself. Elena sat by the window, stitching a thick quilt from leftover fabric, while Jonas McCord fed the fire, using a hammer handle to break apart the ice-locked logs. In that small room, the firelight flickered over the calluses on their hands. 2 pairs of hands that had spent more years surviving than simply living. That evening, when the wind finally eased, they sat down to hot soup. No one spoke for a long while. There was only the sound of spoons tapping bowls and the soft crackle of burning wood. Then Elena asked, without lifting her eyes, "Did you ever have a family?" Jonas stiffened. He set his spoon down and looked into the flames. There was someone, but that's old news. She left. He nodded. She couldn't stand the loneliness. Couldn't stand me either. Elena didn't press. She kept eating, slow and steady, but her voice softened. People are often afraid of silence, but I think silence is only frightening when your own heart is still noisy. Jonas studied her for a long time. He'd never heard anyone put it like that. The women before every one of them had tried to plaster over silence with chatter, while Elena let it pass, natural as breath, like it was part of life itself. The next morning, the sky was the color of ash. Elena hung clothes on the line, bare hands in the bitter wind. Jonas walked by and paused. "Aren't you cold, of course, but the cold reminds you you're alive. You say that a lot, because it's true. I spent years alive but dead." He stayed quiet, didn't ask more, but that night, as they mended his coat by lamplight, Jonas spoke. "I had a younger brother, 5 years younger, during the war. I begged him not to enlist. He went anyway. I found him at Gettysburg, in the pile of fallen. After that, I never went back to the city." Elena stilled. The needle paused in her fingers. "I know what it's like to stand in the middle of sobbing and have no one left to hold." Jonas didn't answer, but something gentler came into his eyes. She went on, "Measured and sure, I lost my husband at 22. He worked at a textile mill. One night, the factory burned. I ran out. He didn't." She swallowed. "I was pregnant. The baby died from the smoke. After that, there was nothing. I've been sewing for hire ever since." The room went still. Only the wind whistled through the seams of the door. Jonas nodded, a quiet share of grief that needed no words. After a moment, he stood and added wood to the stove. "I don't know what the right thing is to say." Elena gave a small smile. "You don't have to say anything. Just don't pity me. I don't know what pity is. I just know what it's like to lose someone." The air seemed to soften between them. Firelight brushed their faces, one lean and hard, the other full and gentle, both marked by the same tiredness of people who'd lost too much. By afternoon, the wind died. They went out to split wood. Jonas handed Elena a small axe. She looked at him, lifted it, and brought it down. Clean stroke. Jonas whistled low. "Not bad. At the mill, we used to cut through heavy cloth all day. This axe is lighter. They worked on without talking. The steady rhythm of steel and the sharp crack of splitting wood echoed through the valley. In that moment, they weren't strangers, they were two survivors, side by side, who knew how to keep going. After dark, Jonas brought out an old bottle of apple liquor. He poured 2 small cups and slid one her way. "Drink. It'll warm you." She eyed the cup, then asked, "Do you drink to celebrate or to forget both?" "You? I drink to remember. If I forget, there's nothing left to hold me here." She took a small sip. Firelight glowed through the amber liquor, glinting in her eyes like dew. Jonas noticed she wasn't pretty in the soft, delicate way people talk about, but there was something in her gaze that made you want to stop, to listen, to believe. He asked, "Are you afraid you'll lose someone again?" "Of course, but I'm more afraid of never daring to love again." Jonas fell silent. Her words rang in his head for a long time, like wind cutting through years of solitude. The next day, sunlight crested the ridge, and Jonas saw Elena hanging a piece of white cloth over the window. He asked, "What's that for?" "To let the light in. You've lived in the dark too long." He stood there watching, offering no objection. When the sun filtered through the fabric, the room looked different, not bright, but bright enough that each dust mote floated in warm, quiet air. Jonas murmured, "You remind me of my brother. He used to say the same thing, that I was afraid of light." Elena turned back. Maybe he was right. Light doesn't hurt people. It just makes them see their wounds. He looked at her for a long while. In that moment, Jonas understood this woman hadn't come to be saved. She'd come to live, and that more than anything made him feel he might be saved, somehow, alongside her. That night, they sat on the porch and watched a sky scattered with stars. From far off, wolves called dry and long. Elena asked, "Do you ever feel afraid when it's just you and the mountain?" Jonas answered, voice low, "I used to, not no more. The mountain taught me silence isn't the enemy. It's how you hear yourself again." "And what do you hear?" He thought, then said quietly, "The sound of something. Coming back. Maybe hope."
They won't survive out there much
Elena
longer.
didn't speak, only watched the fire.
We have to go now.
She knew the
Before it's
deepest
too late.
wounds don't bleed. They lie quiet, waiting for someone patient enough to see them. As they cleared the table, Jonas suddenly asked, "If one day you decide to leave, will you tell me first?" Elena stopped and met his eyes. "No, I'll only go if I know I'm no longer needed here. And if you need to stay, then I'll stay storm or no storm." Her answer was simple as breath, but to Jonas it sounded like a vow. He said nothing more, only nodded. Outside, snow began to fall again. On the table, 2 half-finished cups glowed amber in the firelight, 2 small flames, fragile but warm. That night, Jonas wrote a short line in his notebook. "She isn't afraid to speak of pain. Maybe only those who've died inside truly know how to live on." He closed the book and glanced toward the other room. A sliver of light still shone from under Elena's door, a thin ribbon of gold in a sea of night. For the first time in years, Jonas felt at peace. That morning, the sky hung heavy and gray, the color of lead. Clouds rolled up from the valley, thick and slow like smoke rising from the earth. Jonas McCord stood in the doorway of his cabin, watching the old pine sway in the wind. He knew the signs when the wind began to howl like a voice through the cliffs. Snow was coming. He turned inside to find Elena Vargas tidying the kitchen. She was wrapping bags of cornmeal, stacking wood neatly against the wall, each movement steady, deliberate. Jonas said, "The wind's shifting. If the snow comes fast, we'll be trapped for at least 3 days." Without looking up, Elena replied, 3 days isn't bad. I was once trapped 6 days in a burning mill. At least here there's air." Her words stopped him cold. No one around here compared fire to snow. The wind roared louder. Jonas bolted the shutters and stuffed straw into the wall cracks. Outside, gusts slammed against the roof hard enough to make it groan. Elena carried in buckets of water and covered the well. They moved wordlessly, like two people who had lived together for years. When the first snowflake hit the window, Jonas glanced out, white swallowed everything. Elena built up the fire. The flickering light painted the log walls gold. Jonas sat down, pulled off his gloves, and watched her for a moment. "Are you afraid?" he asked. She didn't turn. "Of what the storm can howl all at once? I only fear people." Jonas chuckled. "I'm the opposite. I understand people. The storm, I never do." Elena placed the last log into the fire, her voice calm. "The storm has its purpose. It only does what it was born to do, sweep away what's too weak to last." A loud bang broke the air. The back door blew open, wind tearing through the cabin. Jonas lunged for it, fighting the gale that nearly lifted him off his feet. Elena grabbed the latch beside him. Together, they forced the door shut, straining against the pressure. Sweat slicked their faces even as the air outside dropped below 5 degrees Fahrenheit. When the door finally sealed, they both collapsed to the floor, gasping. Jonas laughed hoarsely. "If you leave after this, I wouldn't blame you." Elena tilted her head, hair falling loose across her face. "I don't run from storms. I only run when there's hope and I'm too scared to take it." Jonas stared at her. Outside, wind screamed, snow hammered the walls, but inside, the silence spread warm and deep. That night, the storm howled without rest. The door rattled. Smoke spilled back from the stove. Jonas leapt up, cracking a vent to release it. Elena coughed, eyes watering. He threw a blanket over her head and shouted, "Go to the corner, quick." She did, calm even as smoke filled the room. When the air cleared a little, Jonas turned and saw her laughing through the haze. "I used to think suffocating was the easiest way to forget," she said. "Now I know surviving's harder, but it's worth more." He stepped closer and took her hand, warm, firm, alive. "I'm not used to having someone here," he said quietly. "When the storms came before, I just sat and waited them out." Elena squeezed his hand back. "Then don't sit still this time. If the storm wants to swallow us, we'll make sure it knows we're still here." They worked through the night, clearing ash, sealing cracks, hauling in more wood. Neither complained. When they finally sat down, Elena opened a basket and pulled out the last piece of cornbread. She broke it in half and handed him a piece. Jonas took it, murmuring, "They say winter storms test a person's heart." Maybe that's true. Elena smiled faintly. Storms only show who really wants to stay. Around midnight, the wind peaked. The cabin shook like a boat on black water. Jonas feared the roof might lift, so he climbed to the loft with a lantern, bracing the beams. Elena stood below, holding the light steady. The flame wavered, throwing gold across his face through the smoke. He shouted down, "Do you regret it yet? Climbing all the way up here just to be stuck with a mountain hermit." She lifted her chin, voice clear through the roar. "I chose this. I don't need a gentle mountain, just an honest one." Her words struck him deep, sharp as an axe splitting wood. All these years, he'd feared people left because he wasn't enough. Now he realized he'd simply never met anyone brave enough to stay. When the storm finally calmed, Elena leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, her breath even. Jonas sat across from her, watching. In the lamplight, her face was peaceful, solid, unshaken. No makeup, no ornaments, just quiet strength, the kind that even a blizzard couldn't bury. He whispered, almost to himself, "If you make it through a week, maybe I'll believe I can live with someone again." Without opening her eyes, she replied softly, "I don't need you to believe. I just need you not to push me away." Morning broke weakly, pale light filtering through the frost-covered window. The mountains lay silent beneath 3 feet of snow. The cabin still stood, smoke curling gently from the chimney. Jonas stepped outside, squinting against the glare. He breathed in the air cut like knives but smelled pure, clean with new snow. Elena stood at the door, wrapped in a blanket. He turned to her. "We made it." She nodded, eyes glinting. "Told you. I don't run." Jonas stepped closer, resting a hand on the doorframe. "Thank you for staying." Elena smiled, voice rough but warm. "Don't thank me. Thanks. Don't keep the roof up. Just keep living together. That's enough." He didn't answer. Only the sound of snow sliding off the roof broke the stillness. Inside his chest, something shifted small but certain. Maybe the storm hadn't just cleared the mountainside. Maybe it had cleared the fear that had slept inside him for years. That night, they ate hot soup by the fire. Elena looked toward the window and said, "You know, when I was little, my father told me the quietest people often have the loudest hearts. You're one of them, aren't you?" Jonas chuckled. "Maybe. I just never know the right words." She answered, "Then don't speak. Just stay." Sometimes silence is the best reply. Jonas looked at her, the fire reflected in his eyes. In that moment, the mountain no longer seemed harsh, the wind no longer cruel. There was only warmth and the presence of a woman who refused to leave. Later, when he stepped outside to check the roof one last time, he looked up. The clouds had parted, revealing a sky thick with stars. He whispered to the night, "Then stay, if you want, inside." Elena heard him but didn't answer. She simply smiled, folded the new quilt, and fed another log to the fire. The flames leapt higher, lighting the cracked wooden walls, cracks that no longer seemed broken, because now, between them, there was light. After 3 days of the blizzard's roar, the mountain woke into quiet. Snow melted slowly, sloughing off the roof in soft shards under a thin, pale sun. The sky was a clear, delicate blue. Jonas McCord opened the cabin door, stepped onto the porch, and drew a long breath. The air sliced his skin with cold, yet it was the cleanest he'd ever known. Before him, the valley lay under a soft white blanket. The tall pines stood like sentries, their branches bowed with snow as if tipping their heads after a battle. Snow reached his knees. Each step whispered a small, crisp scruff. He raised a hand against the glare. When he looked back, a thread of smoke lifted from the chimney, and Elena Vargas stood in the doorway, wrapped in the wool scarf he'd given her, cheeks pink from the winter sun. "Beautiful," she murmured, "like the world just got washed." Jonas nodded. After a storm, everything's different. Only the mountain stays the same. "Maybe," Elena said, but you're different. How she smiled small, warm. You used to look at the mountain like an enemy. Now you look at it like an old friend. He didn't answer at first, then smiled too. They started to tidy up the place. Jonas split more wood. Elena shoveled paths, put scattered supplies back in order. Each did their task without needing words. By noon, Jonas paused, watching her haul pans of snow to the back. Her dress was damp, breath smoking in the cold, but her eyes were steady. He walked over. "You don't have to do all of it. I can." Elena cut in. "You hunt. I keep the home. Everyone does their part. Out here, the first one to stop
They won't
working
survive
loses."
out there much longer.
Jonas laughed. "So,
We have to
we're
go now,
competing."
before it's too
She
late.
tilted her head. "No, we're living." At lunch, they ate the last of the cornbread. Jonas set a jar of honey on the table, the rarest thing in his stores. Elena glanced at it. "You saving that for something special?" Jonas shook his head. "Nothing special up here. I just want to share it today." She dipped a spoon. Sweetness drifted through the room. "Sweet," she said. "The kind of sweet that makes you remember? Remember that there's still something good in the world even when everything else is burned to ash." By afternoon, the sun dropped lower. Golden light washed over the snow until the whole valley looked like a quiet sea of fire. Jonas stood with Elena on the porch, eyes on the far slope. In the distance, a line of deer moved single-file dark strokes on a white page. "They always come back after a storm," he said. "People do, too." Elena narrowed her eyes. The wind tugged a few strands of hair across her cheek. "Not everyone comes back, Jonas. Only the ones who still have somewhere to return to." He fell silent. The breeze carried pine and the clean bite of thawing snow. Softly, he said, "I don't think I've got a place to go back to." Elena turned, meeting his eyes. "Then make one. Up here, nobody needs permission to start over." Jonas chuckled, voice rough with feeling. "You talk like you've lived more years than you have." "I'm not old," she said. "I'm just tired." That evening, Jonas brought out his harmonica. He played the old tune again, low and sad, yet warmer than the night before. Elena sat by the stove and listened. When the music faded, she asked, "Do you ever think about leaving the mountain I did?" He said, "But every time I go down, people feel loud and false. I come back up and breathe easier." She smiled. "Then I get why you stay. Some folks can only breathe in quiet." "And you?" he asked. "Why'd you come?" Elena rested her hands on her knees, gaze far away. "I didn't come to begin again. I came to end my fear." Jonas sat still. Simple words, but he felt the depth of them. They were both learning how to stay not with the mountain, but with their own wounds. When the stove fire sank low, Elena stood and folded the blanket on the chair. "Tomorrow I'll weave more cloth. We can trade with the supply driver when he comes up." Jonas watched her. "You think you'll still be here by then?" She hesitated, then said, "I don't know, but I won't leave because I'm cold." He nodded. "I'm not asking to hold you here. I just need to know if I should build the extra room." She gave a small, unreadable smile. "If you build it, I'll stay. Simple as that." The next morning, sunlight slipped through the window and lit the fine dust in the air. Jonas woke to the sound of a hand mill turning. Elena was grinding grain, her hair loose, strands floating in the light like gold thread. He stood quietly, not wanting to break the moment one small piece of peace in a life that had known so little of it. Elena turned, caught his look, and asked softly, "What are you thinking? I'm thinking this cabin's never smelled like this before," he said. She laughed. "Smelled like what?" "Like living," he said. "Like someone really lives here." She lowered her head and kept cranking the mill. "Good. I hate the smell of loneliness." The day moved with a strange calm. They worked, they ate, they spoke in short lines that somehow lingered after. At sunset, Jonas opened his notebook and wrote, "She's unlike the others. No promises, no demands. She's just there like morning light after a storm faint. But it makes me want to believe." That night, Elena sat by the window. The moon rose, laying silver across the snow. Jonas brought her a cup of herb tea. She took it and said quietly, "I used to think I'd forgotten how to trust. Maybe trust doesn't die, it just sleeps." "Who wakes it?" Jonas asked. Elena looked at him. "Maybe this mountain, or maybe you." He didn't know what to say. He just sat beside her and watched the moon. They were silent, but something was taking shape in that silence like a seed pushing a first green thread through the snow. Before bed, Jonas stepped out to check the horses. The night was crystal clear, the stars so bright he could see his breath plume into white. He lifted his eyes to the ridge and whispered, "This silence, it isn't scary anymore. Inside." Elena had doused the lamp. Only the stove's coals glowed red. She curled into her blanket and smiled for no clear reason, maybe because safety had finally found its way back after so many years. When Jonas came in, he sat by the stove and opened his notebook again. Under yesterday's line, he added after the storm, "I realized I don't just want to survive. I want someone to share this silence with." Outside, snow began to fall again, light and gentle, like the mountain breathing. That morning, sunlight broke through at last. Snow slid from the cabin roof in slow, glittering sheets. Jonas McCord woke earlier than usual. He led his horse from the stable, planning to check his traps down the ridge inside. Elena Vargas was still asleep, her breathing steady and warm. He paused in the doorway, watching the faint shape of her beneath the blanket, then stepped out. For some reason, he hesitated to leave. Something had changed, small but real. The trail down the valley was slick with thin ice. Jonas walked slowly, every step crunching sharp beneath his boots. He carried his rifle and hunting knife, the tools that felt more familiar than words. But that morning, Elena's words echoed in his head. "Trust doesn't die. It just sleeps." He smiled to himself, surprised he remembered every syllable. At the forest's edge, he spotted fresh wolf tracks pressed into the snow. They led toward his trap line. Jonas crouched, touched the edge of one, then tightened his grip on the rifle. A lone wolf meant hunger, and hunger in winter was braver than any man. He moved carefully, wind cutting his face like a blade. Far off, a branch snapped. Jonas froze, heart pounding. A gray blur slipped behind a pine. He raised his rifle, then lowered it. It wasn't a wolf. A young deer stood trembling, its leg caught in an old snare. Jonas approached quietly, easing the wire free. The deer struggled, then stilled. When it finally rose, it didn't bolt. It only looked at him, dark eyes, wide, wet, and then walked away into the trees. He stood there a long time. Up here, life and death often lived a breath apart, but today he couldn't pull the trigger. By the time he returned, dusk had tinted the snow pink. Elena was at the stove. The smell of cornbread filled the room. "You were gone too long," she said. "Something happened." Jonas nodded. voice low. Found a deer caught in an old trap. I let it go. She looked up. You're kinder than I thought. He shook his head. No, I'm just tired of taking life. Elena set the pan down softly. When you stop killing, you give something else a chance to live. That's not weakness, that's finding yourself again. Jonas met her eyes steady, dark and quiet. He wanted to say something, but the words jammed in his throat. That evening, they ate together. The fire hummed. Snow outside glimmered like salt. Elena told him about the town she came from. The looms ran all day and night. People were swallowed by the noise. When the machines stopped, I could hear my heart beat, but they feared silence, so they started the engine sooner. Jonas nodded. Here, silence is life. There, it's death. She gave a faint smile. Maybe, but silence is frightening anywhere if you're alone. Later. Jonas stepped onto the porch to smoke. Moonlight spilled like silver water across the forest, newly freed from snow. He heard dripping from the roof, a distant owl's call. Inside him, a strange calm stirred not emptiness, but the kind that comes when someone's close enough you don't have to speak. That night, Jonas dreamed. He saw his brother, Lucas, standing on a snowy ridge, calling his name. Snow dusted his shoulders, his mouth smiling soft. Jonas ran toward him, but when he reached out, Lucas turned to smoke. He woke with a start. Wind hissed through the cracks. Elena was by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her face half lit. Nightmare, she asked. He nodded. My brother. She didn't pry, only poured him hot tea. He sat, hands shaking from cold and memory. I couldn't save him. He said, 10 years, and it still feels like I killed him. Elena placed her hand near his on the table. You didn't kill anyone. The war did. You just survived. Jonas shook his head. Surviving sometimes hurts worse than dying. Elena's gaze held steady. Death ends it. Living means remembering, and only when you can remember without falling apart, that's forgiveness. Her words hit him like a stone sinking deep. He didn't reply, only gripped the cup until it burned his palms. Elena stayed beside him, silent, not soothing, not pitying, just there. The next morning, he woke late. On the table was a note in her careful hand. I've gone down to the valley to gather greens by the stream. Don't worry. Jonas frowned. The trail to the stream was still slick after the thaw. One wrong step could drop her through thin ice. He threw on his coat and went after her. The wind bit at his face, snow crunching to his knees.
They
When
won't
he neared
survive
the
out there
water,
much longer.
a sharp crack split the air ice
We have to go
breaking.
now, before it's
Elena,
too late.
he shouted. No answer. Jonas sprinted along the bank and spotted an overturned basket near a willow. Beneath the translucent ice, a shadow. He smashed the butt of his rifle down, the ice shattering, water stinging his skin. He pulled her out, Elena coughing, pale, but alive. He held her close, both of them shaking. Damn it, you stubborn woman, he rasped. I told you to wait. Elena smiled weakly. If I'd waited, the greens would have wilted. He pulled her tighter. You scared me half to death. She placed a trembling hand on his chest. Then, you can still be scared. Jonas let out a breath that turned to steam. Maybe only when you're here, he said. He carried her back to the cabin, wrapped her in blankets, stoked the fire. Elena shivered but whispered, Don't worry, I've been worse. Jonas dried her hair with a wool cloth, voice soft. You don't have to be strong all the time. Sometimes being weak is the brave way to live. Elena met his eyes, the fire glinting in hers. "If I'm weak," she murmured, "who'll keep your fire burning?" Jonas stopped, then smiled. "You're the most hard-headed person who's ever made it up this mountain." Her laugh was hoarse but bright. "That's why I haven't left." Outside, the sun sank, painting the snow in blood-red light until the valley looked aflame. Jonas opened a window for air, then turned. Elena sat curled in her blanket, cheeks flushed in the fire's glow. Inside him, something was growing slow, steady, like an ember that refused to die. He sat again, voice low. "Elena, when spring comes, I could build a bigger house, a room of your own, with a porch that faces the valley." She looked up, eyes shining. "You planning to send me outside?" He laughed. "No, I want you to have a place to stay longer." She studied him, then said softly, "If you build it, I'll help. But that porch better be big enough for two." Jonas nodded. He didn't know exactly what he was promising, only that, in that moment, he believed it more than anything he ever had. That night. Elena fell asleep early. Jonas sat by the lamp, hand trembling as he wrote in his notebook, "Today I was afraid, not of the storm, not of the mountain, but of losing someone again. Turns out, fear of losing means I've begun to love." Outside. Wind swept through the pines, carrying faint echoes from the valley below. Jonas closed his eyes and listened, and the sound felt like a lullaby. The snow thinned, revealing dark patches of earth and sparse shrubs pushing out tender shoots. Water trickled down from the slopes, circling the cabin with a soft murmur, carrying the damp scent of soil and pine resin. Jonas McCord braced a hoe and looked over the plot behind the house where he planned to start a small garden. He'd never imagined growing anything besides firewood and traps. Yet this spring, Elena Vargas had given him another idea. "The ground's still cold," she said, stepping out with a basket of seeds she'd brought from Missouri. "We should wait a few more days." Jonas looked up and smiled. "You're not afraid to wait," Elena answered. "Lot, but sure. If something's worth planting, it's worth waiting for." That simple line warmed him. For 10 years he'd forgotten how to wait for anything. Now, he found himself waiting each morning to hear her call his name. Elena knelt at the garden's edge and tested a handful of dirt. "This soil's better than I thought," she said. "You're not just good with an axe, Jonas." He laughed. "I only know how to live. Everything else you're teaching me." She shook her head. "No one teaches anyone how to live. We just relearn how not to give up." All morning they worked the ground together. Thin sunlight lay across their backs, the chill lifted by degrees. Each stroke of the hoe, each palmful of earth, seemed to clear away what loneliness remained between them. When they paused, Elena sat on a rock and wiped her brow. Jonas brought her a cup of warm water. They stared out toward the Sierra-lined peaks still white at the crown, slopes turning brown. "Do you ever think of leaving?" Elena asked. Jonas considered. "Before you came, I thought it every day. Now, I'm not sure I'd know where to go." She smiled, voice low. "Sometimes, finding a place to stay is harder than finding a place to go." That afternoon, they stacked wood in the shed. Elena told him how, back at the mill, she once planted a tiny flower patch behind her boarding house, but before it could bloom, someone ripped it up. "I figured maybe flowers weren't meant for me," she said. Eyes on the fire, Jonas replied. "Maybe the flowers were just waiting for the right person to water them." After dark, he taught her to shoot. Under the dim moon, Jonas stood behind her, adjusting her hands on the trigger. "Don't fear the crack," he said. "Think about your breath." She squeezed. The bullet cut the center of the wooden target. "Good," he said, grinning. Elena tilted her head. "Are you teaching me to defend myself, or teaching me to shoot you if I have to?" Jonas half joked, half meant it. Both. Around here, nothing's certain but the human heart. She was quiet a moment, then said, "Then I won't fire unless you run." He laughed, but something rose in him he couldn't name, warm and a little afraid. The days passed peacefully, and each morning Jonas noticed the cabin had changed. Elena hung small cloth pieces, hemmed the curtains by hand, and stitched simple patterns on them. She planted millet along the porch and set a ring of flat stones around the tree trunk. "For pretty," she said. He asked, "What's pretty for, to remember we're still alive?" She answered. By late day, they ate venison by the fire. Elena watched the flames reflected in Jonas's eyes and asked, "Have you ever truly loved someone?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure. I thought I had, but maybe I only wanted someone to fill the emptiness." She nodded softly. "Me too. Love doesn't show up when you go looking. It comes when you stop running." Jonas studied her. "So, have you stopped?" "I'm learning how to stand still," she said. After supper, she opened a small wooden box. Inside was an unfinished embroidered cloth. "I want to stitch a large table runner," she said. "So, when people see it, they'll know this is a home for who Jonas asked." Elena smiled, eyes glistening. "For people who don't leave each other by the side of the road." One day, when he came back from the woods, he found her writing on a slip of paper. She folded it fast, but he'd already seen the first line, "If I leave." He froze. "Are you planning to go?" Elena met his gaze. "Calm. I'm writing a letter for the day. I might have to. People should always have last words ready." Jonas shook his head, voice hardening. "Don't say that. I've buried enough people." Elena answered gently. "I'm not talking about death. I'm talking about choice. I want to know I'm staying because I want to, not because I'm afraid." The words left Jonas quiet. He didn't try to hold her. That night, he sat long on the porch, watching snowmelt drip in tiny beats off the steps. He understood you can't keep someone by fearing you'll lose them. You can only let them choose to stay by trust. At dawn, Elena went out early. When she returned, she carried a bunch of wild purple flowers. "They grow at the foot of the slope," she said. "I think they needed someone to pick them." Jonas smiled. "You saved them from being trampled." She shook her head. "No, I just wanted to remember what it feels like to bring flowers home." She set them on the table, and the cabin seemed brighter. That day they sat on the porch, wind threading pine and new earth together. Jonas said, "I used to think my life ended here in silence and cold wind, but now I think maybe it's only beginning." Elena tipped her head, gentle-eyed. "Sometimes starting over just takes two people willing to sit still beside each other." That evening, he handed her a small box he'd made from pine. "For you," he said. Inside lay a necklace, dried pine seeds strung on red thread. "You made this?" she asked. Jonas nodded. "I don't have gold, but this won't rust." Elena touched it and slipped it on, her smile bright in the firelight. "I don't need gold," she said. "I just need someone to think of me when no one else does." That night, Jonas didn't sleep. He listened to Elena's even breathing in the next room, to the wind threading through the cracks. He realized the peace he once mistook for loneliness was now what he feared losing most. He wasn't living just to survive anymore. He was learning to love slow and quiet, like spring touching the mountain. Before bed, he wrote in his notebook, "Everything around me is changing. The snow melts, the ground warms, and my heart isn't frozen anymore. Maybe the mountain's the same. Maybe I'm the one who's different." One April morning, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the valley. Jonas McCord was sawing wood when he looked up, squinting down the slope. A lone rider emerged from the mist, a man in a brown leather coat, wide-brimmed hat shadowing half his face. Jonas set the saw aside and stepped forward. From the cabin, Elena Vargas hurried out, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes alert. Up here, strangers rarely brought good news. The man dismounted, brushed snow from his shoulders, and gave a stiff smile. "You, Jonas McCord,"
They won't
he
survive
rasped,
out there much
his
longer.
voice carrying the drawl of the South.
We have to
Jonas
go now,
nodded.
before it's too
"I
late."
am. What's your business?" The stranger pulled a crumpled envelope from his coat. "Letter from Silver Creek. Broker asked me to bring it up." Jonas took it, eyes never leaving him. The man's gaze wandered, landing on Elena. "So, this is the last mail-order bride everyone's been talking about," he said with a mocking lilt. Elena raised an eyebrow. "Who told you that?" He shrugged. "Word travels fast. Folks betting you wouldn't last half a season." Jonas stepped closer, his tone low and cold. "Gossip won't keep a man alive here. You've delivered your letter. Now ride down before dark." The stranger chuckled, though unease flickered behind his eyes. "Didn't mean trouble. Just figured you'd want to know what's happening down in town." Roads are open again. Jonas said nothing. The man gave Elena one last glance, swung into the saddle, and tipped his hat. Good luck surviving. As the hoofbeats faded, Elena looked at Jonas. "You don't trust anyone, do you?" He kept his eyes on the trail. "It's not about trust. I just know this mountain keeps secrets better than people do." Inside, Elena laid the envelope on the table, old yellow paper, cracked wax seal, the uneven scrawl of the marriage broker. Jonas opened it, skimmed the page. His face darkened. Elena asked quietly, "What is it?" He set the letter down. "They say, if I still want to continue the program, there are new women available. They think you'll leave like the rest." Elena was silent for a long moment, then said, "And what will you tell them?" Jonas met her eyes. "I don't need their letters anymore." She smiled faintly, not quite happy. "Sounds like a goodbye." He stepped closer, voice low. "No, it's a choice." That afternoon, Elena went to wash clothes by the stream. The water was clear, reflecting the sky after rain. She heard Jonas's steps behind her but didn't turn. "You still upset about this morning?" she asked. He sat on a rock, dipping his hands into the cold flow. "Not upset, just thinking maybe you'd be safer without me." Elena set the wet fabric down, looking at him. "You think I'm afraid of hardship, Jonas? I only fear living without a reason." He said nothing. The water ran between their hands cold, pure, carrying away brittle leaves. Elena whispered, "People think I was foolish to come up here, but I found something they don't have silence that doesn't make me lonely." That night, wind rose again. Jonas built the fire. Light rippled over the log walls. Elena sat sewing, her fingers quick and sure. Then she said, "That man this morning, his eyes looked like someone who's known you." Jonas nodded slowly. Maybe. I used to work near town before I came up here. Some folks thought I hid gold from my old unit after the war. She looked up. Did you? He smirked, half truth, half jest. If I did, I wouldn't be living in this wreck of a cabin. Elena chuckled softly, though her eyes stayed serious. You don't owe anyone. Jonas's tone dropped. No, but sometimes the past comes looking anyway. That night, a wolf howled somewhere beyond the ridge. Jonas grabbed his rifle and stood. Elena reached out, touching his sleeve. Don't go far. He nodded, opened the door, and cold air rushed in. Outside, the sky was thick black, the moon hidden behind clouds. He circled the stable, checking the latches, no wolf tracks. But there were fresh hoof prints. The stranger had returned. Jonas went back inside and locked the door. Someone's out there, he said quietly. Elena looked up. What does he want? Maybe just to see if we scare easy. Her eyes hardened. Then he'll be disappointed. By morning, the tracks were gone. Elena brewed coffee, its smell soft and strong in the cabin. Jonas sat down, his gaze easing. You really aren't afraid, are you? She looked out the door. Jonas, I've already lost everything. There's nothing left to fear. He smiled faintly. There is. There's us. At noon, they went to the valley for water. When they returned, a scrap of paper was pinned to the door. Scrawled words read, Be careful, trust in a woman. The mountain doesn't keep secrets. Jonas crushed the paper in his fist. Elena took it from him, tore it calmly into small pieces, and dropped them into the fire. If someone's trying to divide us, she said, they're too late. He stared at her, eyes dark as the ridges. You don't understand out here. Rumors kill faster than bullets. She smiled faintly. Then let them kill your silence first. That evening, Jonas sat on the porch, wind hissing through the valley. Elena brought him a mug of warm cider. Worried, she asked. He nodded. I've lost everything once because of a rumor. I won't let it happen again. She sat beside him. Then don't let words decide for your heart. Jonas looked at her for a long time. You don't know what you're doing to me, he said quietly. Elena smiled. Of course I do. I'm teaching you that trust is a kind of courage, too. They sat in silence. Above them, the moon broke free of the clouds, casting silver across the valley floor. Jonas murmured, If he comes back tomorrow, I'll tell him there's nothing left here to find. And if he doesn't, she asked. Then maybe, he said, this mountain's finally accepted us. Inside. Elena paused by the table, touching the wilted purple flowers from the week before. She replaced the water, straightened the stems, and whispered, Everything needs care, even the fragile things. Jonas watched her, voice low, even trust. That night, he didn't write in his notebook. He simply sat by the fire, listening as she hummed a slow, old tune, a song about a woman waiting for her husband through the storm season. Her voice was plain, not strong, but warm and real like the mountain's own breath. And in that moment, Jonas knew no matter if the stranger returned, no matter how far the rumors spread, the only thing he wanted to keep was the voice that could calm an entire spring. For days, spring rain fell without pause. Water ran in streams around the cabin, softening the earth to mud. Jonas McCord rose early, mending the fence where the runoff had carved deep ruts. Elena Vargas stood under the porch roof, holding a wet blanket in her hands, watching him quietly. through the gray veil of rain. His figure looked strong and solid, but his eyes carried weight. She knew ever since the stranger's visit, he hadn't truly been at peace. By noon, the rain eased. Jonas sat near the fire, cleaning his rifle. Elena placed a steaming cup of coffee beside him and said softly, "You're taking that gun again." He nodded without looking up. "I want to check the tracks around the valley." She sighed. "Jonas, sometimes a man traps himself tighter with fear than with wire." He lifted his head, eyes gray and steady. "You don't know what people can do over a rumor. They can burn a whole life down." Elena was silent for a moment. She sat beside him, staring into the flames. Then, quietly, "Oh, I know. I was thrown out of my boarding house because they said I was seeing the mill owner. I wasn't. I was bringing fabric to his wife. After that, I stopped fearing lies. What scares me now is keeping quiet long enough for someone else to define me." Jonas laid the gun down and looked at her. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." She smiled faintly. Not strong, just tired of being weak. By afternoon, the clouds broke open to light. Jonas left the cabin, rifle and knife in hand. Elena called from the porch, "Don't go too far." He turned back with half a grin. "There's nowhere I can go. The mountain doesn't know the way home." He crossed the forest, air damp with moss and rot. Following faint tracks along the valley, he found no new prints, only broken twigs. Likely deer. He slowed, stopping by the stream where he'd once pulled Elena from the ice. Now the water ran clear, stones glinting beneath. He sat, staring at his reflection, a man with gray threaded through his hair, eyes worn and hollow, and a faint scar along his neck, a relic of the war, a secret he kept from everyone. Jonas splashed cold water over his face. For a heartbeat, the crack of rifles echoed in his mind the day his brother Lucas fell. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to silence the scream that never left him. But memory has a way of outlasting breath. When he returned near dusk, Elena was lighting the lantern. "You all right?" she asked. He nodded, but his eyes told a different story. Something inside him was unraveling. "Jonas," she said gently, "sometimes silence isn't strength, it's how wounds rot." His voice was rough. "If I told you everything, would you even believe me?" She met his gaze. "I believe everything you can't bring yourself to say." He sat, taking the cup of tea she handed him. Her hand brushed his steady, warm. "I left Lucas behind," he said quietly. "When the unit retreated, I got scared. I ran. When I came back, he was gone. Since then, I haven't believed I deserved to live." Elena placed her palm against his chest. "You didn't leave him. You survived. And now you're saving what's left of both of you." The firelight danced across their faces, tracing years of weariness into something human again. Jonas whispered, "Maybe you're right. I've buried him under silence too long."
They won't survive out there much
Elena's
longer.
voice was soft as breath.
We have to go now.
"Everything you bury
before
grows
it's too
roots.
late.
Jonas, if you don't dig it up, it'll pull you down." That night, he didn't sleep. He wrote in his notebook for the first time about Lucas. His name shaken but legible, I still hear his laugh. Maybe he never really left. By morning, sunlight brushed gold across his shoulders. Elena was outside watering the small patch behind the house. Tiny green shoots had broken through the soil, trembling in the wind. He stood for a long moment before saying, "Maybe I should learn to grow something too." She turned, smiling. "Start with trust. Every seed needs the soil to believe in it. Jonas helped her set new stakes, spreading straw to keep the roots warm. He asked, "When the flowers bloom, what color do you want them to be?" Elena thought for a second. "White, the color of beginning again." He nodded, smiling quietly. At noon, they ate together on the porch. The air smelled of pine sap, wet soil, and faraway water. Elena told him about Missouri, the small street where she worked at a sewing shop. The rainy night she decided to leave. "I didn't tell anyone," she said. "Just packed what I could carry and walked out. Never looked back." Jonas asked, "Weren't you afraid?" She smiled. "Of course, but fear's not as bad as staying somewhere you've already died inside." He was silent, then said, "You ever think of going back?" Elena shook her head. "If I went back, I wouldn't be me anymore. The woman I was, she stayed in that night. Later, a light rain returned, tapping softly on the roof. Jonas stood at the window, watching the drops trail down the glass. Elena came beside him. "You know," she said, "I used to hate the rain, but now I think it's like people dirty sometimes. But still, what makes the earth come alive?" He turned toward her, smiling. "Maybe I'm like that ground. You're the one making me live again." Her eyes softened. For a moment, the cabin seemed smaller, the air thicker with warmth. Jonas said quietly, "I don't know what to call this, but maybe it's the thing I forgot how to believe in." Elena whispered, "Don't name it. Just hold it, like breathing." That night, when the fire burned low, Jonas stayed behind. He opened his notebook and wrote, "I told her about Lucas, and she didn't leave. If he were alive, he'd want me to live like this without fear, without running." He paused, looking toward her room. The door was slightly ajar, a soft line of light spilling out. He murmured, barely above a breath, "Thank you for coming. Elena, thank you for not leaving." Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky cleared, revealing a faint ribbon of stars. And beneath that quiet light, in the little garden behind the cabin, a new sprout had broken through the soil, tiny, fragile, yet certain of its place in the world. When June came, the mountains changed their color. From the once cold rocks now spread a lush carpet of green. The streams swelled with water, fish flashing beneath the sunlit ripples. Jonas McCord and Elena Vargas began their days earlier, while dew still clung to the pines and birdsong filled the hollow. Their lives had found a quiet rhythm work: eat, silence, then soft talk about the smallest things. One morning, Elena brought out a new shirt. "Try this on," she said. Jonas took it, fingers brushing the coarse but softened cloth. The faint scent of soap still there. "You made this?" he asked. She nodded, from an old feed sack. "Not pretty, but sturdy." Jonas smiled. "Sturdy's what I need." When he slipped it on, it fit well, just a little tight across the shoulders. She looked up, pride flickering in her eyes. "Now you look like a man ready to start over." That day, they went into the woods to gather wild honey. Sunlight filtered through the trees, glinting off Elena's hair. Jonas told her how, as boys, he and Lucas had once trapped a wild hive and ended up with their faces swollen from stings. Elena laughed clear and bright as the stream beside them. "You still this reckless?" she teased. He grinned. "Not reckless, just learn to endure." She tilted her head. "Enduring isn't always strength, Jonas. Sometimes strength is letting someone carry part of the weight." When they returned, they poured the honey into jars. Elena tasted a drop, smiling with a sweetness that outshone the honey itself. Jonas watched her, voice soft. "You make everything worth keeping." Elena smiled back. "I only help you see what was already there." That afternoon, hot wind swept the ridge. Jonas climbed to the shed roof to mend loose boards. "Be careful up there," Elena called. "The wind's picking up." He laughed. "I've been here longer than the wind." Then came a sharp crack. The rotten plank gave way. Jonas fell hard into the hay. "Elena!" He heard her cry as she ran to him. He lay still, blood trickling from his brow. She knelt, shaking him. "Jonas, can you hear me?" He blinked. "I'm fine, just dizzy." Elena helped him inside, cleaned and bandaged the wound. "You need to rest," she said firmly. Jonas shook his head. "Can't. Still have to. Nothing's more important than you staying alive. You hear me?" It was the first time she'd spoken to him like that, commanding, fierce. He looked at her, seeing worry and strength intertwined in her eyes. "I thought you weren't afraid of anything," he murmured. Elena's voice trembled softly. "I'm afraid of losing what makes me believe in myself." 3 days later, his wound had healed. He sat reading while Elena mended the torn shirt. "You should learn to slow down," she said. "The mountain isn't going anywhere." He chuckled. "If I slow down any more, you'll have to drag me from this chair." She smiled. "Then I will." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn the peaks red. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love had to be grand, blazing. Now I know it can just be two people waiting for the sun to go down." Jonas squeezed her hand. "And waking up together tomorrow," one morning, as Jonas cooked breakfast, Elena came out holding an unsealed letter. "I want you to read this," she said. He unfolded the page, her handwriting graceful. "Dear Clara, if you're reading this, it means I've found where I belong. There's a man here quiet, awkward, but kind. He doesn't promise, doesn't paint pretty words. He just stays, and somehow that makes me feel safe. I think I'm learning to love again." Jonas looked up after a long silence. "You'll send this to your sister." Elena nodded. "Clara's the only one who ever understood me. But I haven't mailed it yet. I'm afraid if I do, all this will vanish like a dream." Jonas's tone was steady. "What's real doesn't disappear." That afternoon, they went to the garden. The white flowers Elena planted had bloomed petals thin as mist. "I'll send the letter the day the first flowers open," she said. Jonas smiled. "Then today's the day." That night, the wind drifted through the pines carrying the scent of those flowers. Elena wrote the last line. "If one day I'm no longer here, know that I once lived fully." She folded the letter and set it in the wooden box beside her bed. Jonas said nothing, just touched her shoulder gently, a silent promise. The next morning, they went down to the valley to give the letter to Pete, the old stage driver. Pete beamed when he saw them. "Well, looks like the mountains finally let someone stay." Jonas grinned. "Not the mountain giving in, it's her. She's stronger than the mountain." Pete nodded toward Elena. "I believe it." On their way back, warm wind tugged at Elena's skirt. Jonas stopped midway up the trail, looking around. The mountains still stood the same, but everything felt new. "I used to think I was part of this place," he said. "Now I see it only means something because you're here." Elena smiled softly. "You don't have to say it. I know." That night, they sat on the porch without words. Crickets sang, water murmured somewhere below. Jonas laced his fingers through hers in the dark. "Thank you for staying," he whispered. She answered, "Thank you for letting me choose to." When the moon rose, Jonas opened his notebook and wrote, "She sent the letter today. I don't know when it'll be read or if it matters. What's real doesn't need proof. I'm not afraid of rumors or the past anymore, only of waking one morning and forgetting this feeling peace, carried on the wind and the scent of white flowers. Outside, the summer breeze swept through the garden, and the blossoms swayed softly as if whispering a secret. Perhaps it was about trust, or about two people who found each other in a wilderness that once held nothing but loneliness. September came to the Sierra Hollow wrapped in gold and chill. The mountains turned amber, and each morning the cabin roof glistened under a thick coat of dew. When sunlight broke through, the whole valley seemed to drift inside a soft gray haze. Jonas McCord started the fire earlier each day, while Elena Vargas packed the last jars of wildberry jam. Their lives had settled into a rhythm so peaceful that sometimes Jonas feared peace itself might be tested. One morning, Pete Morrison, the old wagon driver, returned. He brought dry goods, and with them, a single letter. "For Miss Vargas," he said, voice rough, "from Missouri." Elena took it, her hands trembling. She opened the envelope by the fire, eyes tracing each line slowly. When she finished reading, she said nothing for a long time.
They won't
Jonas
survive out there
waited,
much longer.
silent, until she finally spoke.
We have to go now.
"My sister's gone,"
before it's too late.
Elena said softly. "Last summer, pneumonia." Her tone was calm, too calm, but Jonas heard the fracture beneath it. He stepped closer, laid a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry." Elena folded the letter, her voice barely a whisper. "There's nothing to be sorry for. I just wrote too late." She never knew I'd found peace that afternoon. Elena sat in the garden of fading white flowers. Most petals had fallen, a few clung stubbornly in the wind. Jonas brought her a cup of tea. "Do you regret it?" he asked. She gazed at the flowers. "No. I think we all arrive too late in someone's life. But as long as we still arrive, that's enough." In the days that followed, Jonas noticed her quietness, not the gentle kind he'd grown used to, but a hollow sort of stillness. One evening, as he chopped wood, she came to him. "Jonas, I want to go back to Missouri," she said, "to see her grave." He set down the saw, looked at her for a long moment. "You want to go alone?" She nodded. "I need to face my past, to see if I've really left it." Jonas's jaw tightened, but he only said, "If you go, I'll wait." 2 days later, Pete returned to take her down the mountain. Before she left, she squeezed Jonas's hand. "Don't forget to water the flowers," she said, "and don't let the fire die." He answered, "If you come back, it'll still be burning." After she left, the cabin grew larger, emptier. Jonas kept working, but the air felt wrong. Every sound, the door, the wind, the spoon clinking against a pot echoed too long, as though the walls missed her voice. Each night, he still brewed 2 cups of tea, watching hers grow cold. 1 week passed, then 2, then 3. No letters, no word. Worry gnawed at him like the cold. Then, one morning, while gathering firewood, Jonas saw smoke rising from the south ridge near the trail to the valley. At first, he thought it was fog. Then came the bitter smell of burning pine. Wildfire. He dropped the axe and ran. Flames had crawled close to the road to town. The wind howled dry and furious, scattering embers like red rain. Jonas and a few men from the wagon station fought the fire through the night, hands blistered, lungs burning. By dawn, The forest was a charred sea of ash, and through it all, one thought clawed at him. Where is Elena 2 days later? As smoke still hung low, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the ridge. Jonas turned, and there she was. Pete led the horse, and behind him, Elena sat wrapped in a dusty shawl, eyes tired but alive. Jonas froze, then stepped forward. "You." She cut him off, voice hoarse but steady. "I'm home." They stood facing each other under the ashen sky, neither speaking. Finally, Jonas reached out and pulled her close. Elena pressed her face against his chest and whispered, "My sister's at peace now, and so am I." Back at the cabin, she unpacked a small cloth bundle. Inside lay an old silver hairpin shaped like a flower. "It was hers," she said. "She told me if I ever find where I belong, I should pin it to that person's coat." Jonas stood still as she stepped closer and fastened the pin to his collar. "Now," she said softly, "you're my home." That night, the wind roared outside, but the fire inside the cabin burned bright and steady. Elena told him of her journey, the empty houses left behind after the plague, the moss-covered gate of the graveyard, and the silence of standing before her sister's name carved in stone. "I didn't cry," she said. "I just felt empty, but not broken. Maybe because I knew I had somewhere to return to." Jonas nodded. "You didn't just find a home. Elena, you built it. In the days that followed, they worked to heal the land. Elena scattered seeds in the blackened soil. Jonas rebuilt fences, hands rough and scarred. The smell of smoke still lingered, but beneath it came the faint scent of green returning." One morning, Elena looked at the scorched hills. "See," she said, "fire doesn't only destroy, it clears a way for new roots." Jonas smiled. "Just like us." That night, she opened her small notebook by the fire and wrote, "People think love is the blaze that burns everything down. But sometimes it's the fire that keeps you warm, quiet, patient, steady enough to hold back the dark." Jonas watched her hand move across the page, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "If the mountain ever loses its fire," he said softly, "I'll still remember your voice reading those words." Before bed, Elena set the silver pin on the table. The flames reflected off its polished edge, flickering like a promise. "Tomorrow I'll sew new curtains," she said. "Winter's coming. We should be ready." Jonas nodded. "This time," he murmured, "I'm not afraid of winter." Outside, the wind swept through the burned pines, carrying the scent of ash, earth, and hope, and there, in the heart of the Sierra Hollow, 2 fires kept burning, one in the hearth and one within them both. The first snow came softly, blanketing the pines in white. The whole valley of Sierra Hollow fell silent, broken only by the wind whistling through the cliffs. Jonas McCord's cabin stood sturdier now, windows sealed tight, roof layered thick with new planks. Inside, the fire burned bright in the hearth, casting golden light over Elena Vargas's face as she sat by the table, embroidering. Jonas tossed another log into the fire. "You've been sewing since morning," he said. Without looking up, she smiled. "I want to finish this cloth before Christmas. This year, we'll have a real table." He looked around the cabin. A small map hung on the wall. He'd marked the patch of forest that burned last fall. On the shelf were jars of honey, fruit preserves, and a bouquet of dried white flowers Elena had saved from summer. Everything was simple, but under the firelight, all of it felt alive. Elena lifted her gaze. "Jonas, do you ever think about the future? After winter," he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I used to think I'd grow old here, alone. But now, maybe I'll build a small room out back. Who knows? Maybe one day there'll be a child running around. Elena smiled softly, eyes warm as melting snow. That afternoon, the storm rolled in. The wind screamed, shaking the shutters. Jonas reinforced the doors. Elena gathered wood and checked the oil lamps. Is it always like this every year, she asked. He nodded. Yeah, but this year it feels less cold. She laughed lightly. If you say that every winter, I might stay to hear it. Jonas grinned. Then you better stay. The blizzard lasted 3 days. They barely stepped outside. They read by the fire, told stories, laughed at nothing at all. Jonas spoke of his first days in Sierra. Elena of a cat she once had in Missouri that slept in her sewing basket. Their laughter mingled with the howl of the wind, two small, bright sounds in a world of white. But on the 4th day, Elena started coughing. At first it was faint, and then deeper, harsher. Jonas brought her warm water, herbal tea, anything he could find. I'm fine, she said with a weak smile. He touched her forehead, burning hot. You're not fine, he said. I'll go down to the station for medicine. She grabbed his hand. The roads are buried. Jonas, you'd lose your way. I just need to rest. He stayed beside her all night, listening to her breathe. The storm battered the roof. Snow hit like pebbles against the glass. Jonas didn't pray, he didn't know how, but inside him rose a quiet plea. Please, don't take her. By morning, Elena opened her eyes, pale but lucid. You've been up all night, she whispered. He nodded, squeezing her hand. I was afraid if I slept, you'd be gone. She smiled faintly. You can't keep me if God calls, but I think he'll let me stay a little longer. Someone has to remind you not to frown when you cut wood. Jonas let out a breathless laugh and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, as though touching something sacred. On the 5th day, the snow finally stopped. Light filtered through the window, thin but kind. Elena sat up, weak but awake. Jonas cooked porridge, insisted she eat. She watched the snow outside and said softly, It's beautiful, isn't it? It covers the burn marks in the forest like forgiveness. Jonas paused, then murmured, I see something else. Snow just quiets the land for a while, but underneath, the roots are still alive. Elena smiled. Then, that's enough. Later that day, she asked him to bring a wooden box from the shelf. Inside were old letters, unsent. If the day comes when I'm not here, burn them, she said. Jonas gripped her hand. Don't talk like that. She smiled weakly. I'm not afraid of dying, Jonas. I'm only afraid of living without leaving something beautiful behind. He bent his head, voice thick. You already have here, in me. That night, he sat by the fire, listening to her steady breath. He opened his notebook and wrote, She sleeps peacefully. And I understand now love doesn't save us from pain. It only gives us the courage to bear it. The next morning, she woke with a faint smile. Her voice was thin but clear. Jonas, remember the cloth I was sewing. He brought it over and spread it on the table. In its center, she had embroidered 2 mountains intertwined, and beneath them, in small letters, home is where the heart
They won't
heals.
survive out there much longer.
Jonas's eyes blurred. It's beautiful,
We have to go now,
he whispered.
before it's too late.
Elena nodded, squeezing his hand. Then I can rest easy. She drifted to sleep in that quiet winter morning. Jonas sat beside her, watching the rhythm of her breathing fade into the hush outside. He didn't know how long he stayed that way. Only when sunlight touched her hand did he realize the warmth was gone. Jonas didn't cry. He simply sat there, still as the mountain itself. He wrapped her in the blanket she had sewn, placed her near the window where she used to sit and embroider, so the morning light could touch her face one last time. The next day, he dug through the thawing ground beneath the great pine behind the cabin. He laid her to rest with the last bouquet of white flowers from the garden, and the silver hairpin her sister had given her. Before covering the earth, he said quietly, "You told me to believe in what I can't see. Now I do." When spring came, a cluster of white flowers bloomed from that patch of soil, shining against the melting snow. Every morning, Jonas sat beside them with his coffee, talking as if she were still there. "You were right," he would say. "The mountain isn't as cold anymore," and one morning, the villagers noticed smoke rising from his chimney, but no one came to the door. On the table inside, his notebook lay open to its final page. She never left. She just became part of this place. When the wind passes through, I can hear her laugh. In Sierra Hollow, they say that every winter, when the snow first falls, white flowers bloom again. No one plants them. Yet they always return, like memory, like a love that never fades. Love isn't reserved for the young, the beautiful, or the flawless. The story of Jonas and Elena reminds us that as long as there's still one heart willing to listen, one hand willing to stay, anyone, no matter how scarred or weary, can be loved again. The mountains may be cold, but the human heart doesn't have to be. Even if you've walked through loneliness, loss, or age, it's never too late to believe in a new beginning. Because sometimes what we need isn't someone who changes us, but someone who simply makes us want to live again. Thank you for joining us at Frontier Hearts. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe so every week we can journey together once more into a new tale where love always finds its way home.